The 2015-16 season will mostly be remembered for the insane run from the Golden State Warriors, where they shattered all kinds of records, including setting a record that was never thought to be broken and surpassing the Chicago Bulls for most regular season wins in a season at 73-9. Then, of course, most people will remember how they came back from a 3-1 lead in the Western Conference Finals over the Oklahoma City Thunder to then blowing a 3-1 lead to the Cleveland Cavaliers in the finals, handing the city of Cleveland their first title in any major sport in over 50 years. But what most people don't remember about that season was that a lot of teams were gunning for that #1 pick, being bad and losing in the hopes of landing a future franchise player, and that player was Ben Simmons. It sounds weird to say now, but go back and look. The tank for Ben Simmons hashtag was a real thing. In fact, Simmons was seen as one of the top NBA prospects since LeBron James at that time. Don't believe me? Go back and look. Articles galore citing Simmons as a once-in-a-generation prospect. Seems crazy now, but the fact of the matter is Ben Simmons was displaying something the league hadn't seen in years, dating back to the days of Magic Johnson, a point guard who had the body of a power forward that could pass, rebound, slash to the basket with ease, and play elite level perimeter defense. Never mind that he couldn't shoot. In 2016, outside shooting wasn't as much of a focus as it is in today's NBA. Yes, it was becoming more commonplace, especially with the rise of small ball, pace and space style offense that the Golden State Warriors were running, but not being able to shoot wasn't seen as big of a weakness as it is today, where it's now considered a necessity. And even though Ben Simmons had kind of a rocky start in his freshman year playing at LSU, was still the clear favorite to be selected #1 overall, and sure enough, the team that was trusting the process in pursuit of tanking to build for the future landed the #1 pick and selected Ben Simmons. Of course, ever since then, Simmons' career has been met with injury issues, questions surrounding his motivation to play, and his complete inability to improve his jump shot year after year. His lack of shooting and timidness to shoot, or even just going up for a dunk in fear of getting fouled and getting sent to the free throw line, ultimately led to his departure from the 76ers. And while questions still remain regarding Ben Simmons' motivation and a desire to play basketball at the highest level after continuing to miss games, missing all of last season even after being traded, missing games this season after having a terrible start, but despite all of this, Ben Simmons is now finally starting to look like he's found himself again, finding his stride and being a versatile, dynamic player that can pretty much do everything on the court, except shoot the ball, of course. If you're new to the channel and enjoy the content, consider subscribing, as this is a newly created channel, and of course, it's always hard to get channels kickstarted in the early stages, and in return, I'll be providing NBA content like this all season long. Now, after the Sixers were eliminated from the playoffs in 2021 by the Atlanta Hawks in that crucial Game 7 on their home court, despite finishing with the #1 seed, and after Ben Simmons absolutely refused to make any plays on offense in the fourth quarter that would require him to score the basketball, making him a liability on the offensive end that the Hawks took full advantage of, it was thought that Ben Simmons' days in Philadelphia were over, especially after Doc Rivers in a post-game interview, when asked if Simmons was the right point guard for their team to be a championship contender, he said he didn't know the answer to that question. And despite some efforts made by the Sixers to get Simmons back on track, to work through his mental health struggles, and to get him to stay with the team, Ben Simmons made it abundantly clear he was never going to be wearing a Sixers jersey again, even if it meant sacrificing his paycheck. Although his bluff was ultimately called when he made it clear he still wanted his money. But after that series, and going into that offseason with the Sixers looking for a trade partner who was willing to take on Ben Simmons' contract, I, for one, as a Bulls fan, wanted to see our front office go after Ben Simmons, given his trade value was at an all-time low, and he fit a lot of areas in need for the Bulls at that time, as this was before the Bulls added Lonzo Ball, DeMar DeRozan, and Alex Caruso. The Bulls desperately needed a playmaking point guard, and they desperately needed a defender. That was something that Ben Simmons could provide, which ultimately the Bulls got in Lonzo Ball, but his availability has also been just as bad as Ben Simmons. But tangent aside, I was surprised to see the complete unwillingness from teams to want nothing to do with Ben Simmons, and I thought, maybe it's just me, but I still see a talented player who can thrive with the right roster around him of shooters and elite level offensive players that can mask his deficiencies on offense and highlight his ability to play make for others while also being a lockdown defender. But as the season wore on, and things got more ugly in Philly, with Simmons not even trying to make efforts to communicate with his team for status updates on his health and mental health, and after he was ultimately traded, he still continued to remain sidelined even after his team was in the playoffs and down against the Celtics, needing help from a defensive perspective, and it was thought that he was going to make his return in Game 4 of that first round series until the Celtics took a 3-0 lead, and Simmons said, "Just kidding, I'm still not ready," which seemed like a pretty cowardly move knowing that the team wasn't going to advance anyway, so what was the point? And at that point, it was clear Ben Simmons' motivation to play the game of basketball was simply not there. He was not the competitor that fans want on your team, and despite all of that talent, it had now become clear to me why there wasn't a big desire for teams to be going after Simmons, even if it meant getting him for pennies on the dollar. Ben Simmons was not that guy, and it made you wonder if he would ever be the same player again. Now, fast forward to this season and seeing Ben Simmons back in action with the Brooklyn Nets, and the guy looked like an absolute shell of himself, couldn't score, was airballing layups, unwilling to put even more than 5 shot attempts in a game, wasn't playing defense like we had remembered, and honestly, the guy simply looked lost on the court, not knowing where he needed to be, unsure of what to do when he had the ball in his hands. And of course, after a few terrible games, Simmons was suddenly sidelined, sitting out, and apparently injured. Granted, being out for a whole season, you're going to show signs of rust. You're going to be a little off and out of shape after first coming back after taking so many months off from playing basketball, but this was something else for a 3-time All-Star, an All-NBA player, and a first-time All-Defensive Team player to be showing up like this even despite taking a year off. And it's funny because when all this was happening, I actually had planned on making a video about whether this was the end of Ben Simmons as we knew it. If by the end of his current contract, which expires in 2025, he would walk away from the game forever. And right before I started working on that video, we saw a sudden turn in Ben Simmons' play. He started playing with more confidence. He was being more aggressive in getting to the basket, actually putting up attempts and not being afraid to get fouled. He was becoming more active on the glass, passing the ball better, court vision improving, and he was much more assertive on defense, pestering the ball handler, getting in passing lanes, making deflections, forcing turnovers, the kind of stuff that we used to see from Ben Simmons when he was a top Defensive Player of the Year candidate. And that turning point was in that game against the Kings in Sacramento. Despite the Nets suffering that horrible loss, Simmons showed up well coming off the bench, going 5 for 7 from the floor, scoring 11 points, running up and down the court, scoring in transition like we used to see him do with the Sixers. He follows it up with a game against the Blazers in which he goes for a perfect 6 for 6, gets a double-double with 15 points and 13 rebounds along with 7 assists, and most recently taking on the Grizzlies, putting up a season-high 22 points, 8 rebounds, 5 assists, goes 11 for 13 from the floor, and it seems like we're finally starting to see the old Ben Simmons again, and maybe he's starting to find himself. Granted, I know it's super early to be making these kind of claims. I know it's really only been 2 or 3 good games from Ben Simmons that we have seen so far this season, and it's very possible he could revert back to his timid, passive Ben Simmons self that we saw at the beginning of the season and at the end of his tenure with the Sixers. But if you're a Nets fan, you have to be encouraged by the small progress you have seen from Ben Simmons in the past week, and it really could be a turning point in the Brooklyn Nets season, which has been met with drama and PR disasters to no end so far this year. And if you have Kevin Durant still doing what he does, Kyrie Irving back and in the lineup, and if he shows up well and is motivated to play at the highest level, and if Ben Simmons can be the Simmons that was an elite level defensive player and playmaker, being surrounded by 2 elite scorers as well as sharpshooters like Seth Curry and Joe Harris, maybe not so much Joe Harris recently, but you have all of that, then this team could be a formidable team in the Eastern Conference. And yes, I'm fully aware I'm getting ahead of myself, and this team could still very well implode, as I'm sure most fans are expecting, but Ben Simmons unlocking his true potential, even if it means he can't shoot, on a team surrounded by shooters, that's a game changer for the Brooklyn Nets. What's going to be fun is seeing them take on the Sixers and how Ben Simmons will handle and respond on the court to all the boos that will be hurled his way every time he touches the ball. Let me know what you guys think of Ben Simmons' most recent progress and improved play on the court. Be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.